Since the fourth chapter of the book of Revelation, we've been in the heavenly scene, caught up into heaven. Where do you suppose heaven really is? You look up in the sky, and we always think of heaven as up. But have you ever just wondered just where heaven is? Is it within the Milky Way galaxy, or is it out in the Andromeda galaxy, or is it beyond all of the galaxies? Is it, clear on out past all the galaxies? How far away do you suppose heaven is? How long do you suppose it takes an angel to travel from heaven here? I believe that heaven is probably a lot closer than we realize. The material universe is made up of atoms, molecules. Interesting thing about an atom and molecular structure, there is far more space than solid material in an atom. A hydrogen atom is made up of a single proton with a neutron revolving around it. If you would blow up the proton in a hydrogen atom until it became the size of a basketball, the electron that revolves around it would be 3,000 miles away if the proton was the size of a basketball. So it shows you how much space there is in what we call solid matter. Of course, hydrogen is a gas, but there is the density, they call it, of an atom. Now, there are stars out there that they, through their calcs, figure the atoms have much greater density than those here on the earth. The star they call the dog star, which they have discovered to be a double star. They thought they were seeing one star, but now, as they've refined the telescopes and all, they realize that it's actually a double star that they're looking at. And so the smaller of the two has been nicknamed the pup. But according to their calcs, the molecular structure of the pup is so dense that a little pebble the size of a teaspoon would weigh 1,720 pounds because of the density, that is, there's less space than solid. The matter is condensed or compressed closer together. So can you imagine walking down the path and seeing a little pebble that happened to be a meteorite from the pup lying in the path, and you decide to kick it out of the way? And then you try and pick the thing up. The density is much greater. Now, because there is so much space within atoms, much more than solid matter, theoretically, it is possible that two worlds could coexist at the same time and filling up the same space in the universe. Each of them passing through the other, and both of them unconscious of the other's existence, because they would be made up of different molecular structures. I find it quite fascinating that when Jesus was in his resurrected body, it was no doubt of a different molecular structure. Because as the disciples were gathered together in a room and the doors and all were shut and locked, suddenly he was in the middle of the room with them. And the inference of the scriptures, he must have passed through the walls or the doors or whatever, because no one opened the door for him. He was just suddenly there. Very possible. The new body just of a different molecular structure. So it would be unimpeded or unhindered by the material of our universe as we understand it and know it in our atom molecular structure that we know. Two worlds could coexist, same time, same place, passing through each other, both unconscious of the other's existence. So while you're sitting here at 747 of another, molecular structure could have come flying through here with 400 passengers bound for some city in that other world, Theoretically. Now, we don't believe that it actually exists, but they say that theoretically that is so. There are angels that are here tonight. The angel of the Lord encampeth about the righteous. Now, the angels, no doubt, are of a different molecular structure than we are. That's why they're invisible to us. And according to the scriptures, there have been times within the scriptures when they did materialize, that is, became visible. But looking at this whole concept, it's quite possible that heaven is much closer than what we usually think when we think of heaven. Because I know in my own mind, when I think of heaven, I usually think of, somewhere beyond our solar system. I don't know how far, but, I always think of it as somewhere beyond the solar system. But not necessarily so. Heaven could be very close to us. It is of a different molecular structure, no doubt. We're in the heavenly scene, wherever that is. It's a whole different dimension. Whole different dimension. It'll be extremely fascinating as we come to know more about it in time to come. This whole vast dimension of which we know so little. We know that we cannot enter into heaven in these bodies. It's going to take the metamorphosis, in the Greek word, metamorphosis, a change of body to enter into heaven, because the Bible tells us that flesh and blood can't enter in, can't inherit the kingdom of heaven. So in order for us to come in, there's got to be, first of all, the change of body. Paul said this corruption, talking about our body, must put on incorruption. This mortal, talking about our body, must put on immortality. So in order for us to enter into the heavenly scene, there has to be this change where we have to receive a new body. Now, the real me and the real you is not the body that you live in. Though we relate to each other through the mediums of the body, this body isn't me. I live in this body. This body is my tent that I live in. One day I'm going to move out of this tent because Jesus has built a mansion for me. He said, I'm going to prepare a place for you. In my Father's house are many mansions, abiding places. If it were not so, I would have told you, and I'm going to prepare one for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I'm going to come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also. Now that's the purpose of God, that I be with him. And one day, I'm going to move out of my tent into the mansion that's been prepared. That always has fascinated me, because as I read the creation account in Genesis, I see where in 6 days God created the heavens and the earth and all that is in them. He's been a little over 1,900 years fixing my mansion for me. When I look around the earth and see what he did in 6 days, I wonder, wow, what's he been doing for 1,900 years? Talking about the new body that I'm going to have. I'm going to prepare a place for you. My spirit, the real me, which is currently living in this tent, will one day move out of the tent and I will be changed. The metamorphosis, change of body. Paul likens it unto the planting of a seed, planting of a bare grain, buried in the ground, even as my remains will probably be put in the ground someplace. But as the seed is placed in the ground and dies, germinates, there comes forth new form. A new body comes out, not the body that you planted. All you planted was a bare grain. Now God gives it a body as pleases him. And Paul said, so is the resurrection of the dead. We are planted in weakness. We're going to be raised in power. We are planted in corruption. We're going to be raised in incorruption. We were planted or sown in dishonor. We're going to be raised in glory. We've been planted as a natural body, but we're going to be raised in a spiritual body. There's a natural body, there's a spiritual body, and as we've borne the image of the earth and have been earthy, so shall we bear the image of the heavens. The body in which you presently live is out of the earth. Dust thou art, to dust thou shalt return. Talking of the body. Who was it? Longfellow said, tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream. For the soul is dead that slumbers, things are not what they seem. Life is real and life is earnest, and the grave is not your goal. Dust thou art, to dust returneth, wasn't spoken of the soul, spoken of the body. Body goes back to the dust. But my spirit enters into a new body, the building of God, not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. Caterpillar lives in a body that is bound to the earth. As we live in a body that's bound to the earth. Our bodies were designed for the earth, made out of the earth, for the earth, of the earth, earthy. The same 17 elements that make up your body are the same 17 elements that make up the dirt outside. Your body is designed to withstand 14.5 pounds of pressure per square inch. Your body is designed to take oxygen out of the atmosphere, which is 79 parts of nitrogen, 20 parts of oxygen, and 1% of other type gases, argon and other gases, ozone. What is the environment of heaven? What is the atmosphere there? I don't know. What is the gravitational intensity there? I don't know. It's different from the earth. And so God's going to give me a new body, probably of a different molecular structure. And so by the time we get to chapter 8 in the book of Revelation, we're in heaven, we're in our new bodies, we're in the new molecular structure, but this earth is still existing down here in its material form. This earth is going through a renovation process right now. The problem today is that we don't see the world that God created. When God created it, He said it's good. Good earth. One thrilling thing is always to get out into untouched nature if possible. Hard to do. Man's gone just about everywhere polluting things. But if you can get out into nature that's been untouched by man, oh, how beautiful it is. And whether it be the desert or the mountains or the ocean or snorkeling or whatever under the water, beautiful when you can get out into an area that hasn't been marred by man. I'm a strong believer in that close to nature, close to God. I believe that God speaks to man in nature. The Bible tells that He does. The Bible tells us that the heavens declare the glory of God. That is, the heavens are talking to man. They're declaring to you the glory of God. The earth is demonstrating or showing His handiwork. And day unto day they are speaking, or every day they are speaking. Every night their voice is going forth, and there's not a speech nor a language where their voice isn't heard. In other words, it's universal. That's why universally man believes in God. And more so when man lives closer to nature. Though he may not understand or know God, he believes in God. He may have some far out concepts of God, but he believes in God. One of our problems with the smoggy skies and the light polluted skies at night is that the heavens can't really speak very clearly. The voice is very fuzzy, garbled. You don't hear clearly the voice of God in nature when you live in this urbanized area. We were out the other night in the boat parade looking at all the pretty lights in Huntington Harbor. Jupiter and Mars were in conjunction. It was an interesting thing to see. Unfortunately, you could not see all of the constellations. It was a clear night, but of course the moon was up somewhat too, and that distracts from good viewing of the stars. But it was a good night because of the clarity down here. But still, the light pollution kept you from seeing. All you could see was just a portion of the constellation Orion. You couldn't see Taurus. But you go up into the mountains, up to the new conference center in Palomar, and I'll tell you, man, you see the Milky Way, you see the constellation, you see jillions of stars. It's sort of comforting to know they're still there. You know, the whole heaven could have blown away, and we wouldn't know it down here for a long time. God speaks to us through nature. And we need to get away many times just to hear the voice of God more clearly. But we're bound to this earth, we're bound to this body until God releases our spirits. But like a caterpillar, we live in a body that's designed to just be on the earth and to crawl on the earth. And though many times we wish that we could escape our environment, we're bound to it. I can imagine a caterpillar's strong desire to escape. Especially when he walks across the highway, all those feet on that hot asphalt. And I can hear that little caterpillar saying, "Whoo, hot, dirty feet, man. I wish I could fly. If only I could fly." And he might try to fly. Climb up a tree, out on a twig, leap, wiggle himself as fast as he can. Don't laugh, you guys. How many of you guys have tried to fly when you were little kids? Sure, I tried to fly one time. I think it'd be exciting if you could fly. Flap your arms and all, but you just, you're not designed to fly. Caterpillar isn't designed to fly. But one day that caterpillar crawls up the side of your house, oozes a little glue, sticks himself under your windowsill, goes into a chrysalis. And in a period of time, you watch that chrysalis, the thing begins to jerk, convulsive kind of jerks. It pops open, and there unfolds these beautiful yellow and black wings. And soon that tiger swallowtail butterfly is flying around the yard. Interesting transformation from a caterpillar to juice to a beautiful butterfly. Take and pinch that chrysalis, and all that's going to come out is an orange juice. Just a liquid substance. You can pop them, and just an orange goo. But somehow that orange goo fashions itself into these beautiful black and gold wings. And as it comes out of the chrysalis, these wings sort of just fold out, and he perches there for just a few seconds to let the, moisture or something dry on the wings. And then, without any lessons, the thing starts to fly. What's happened? He's gone through a metamorphosis, a change of body that has allowed it now to exist in a totally new environment. It's not bound anymore to just crawl on the ground. It doesn't have to worry about hot, dirty feet walking across the highway. It can now soar. It can fly. The metamorphosis. And so the idea of a change of body, in order that we might have a body that would be adapted to a totally different environment, is not unreasonable. It's demonstrated in nature. In plant life, it's demonstrated. The seed dying and the new plant coming forth. The new form out of the old. The body that comes out of the ground isn't the body that you planted. The body that I will have is not this body. I'm going to have a new body. probably of a totally different molecular structure. You say, well, how will you recognize me, and how will I recognize you if you're not bald, you know? We will have an intuitive kind of a knowledge. We will know, the Bible says, even as we are known. We won't need introductions. There's a lot about it that we don't know. God doesn't give us that much detailed information, only enough that we know it's going to be super keno. For the Bible says, beloved, now are we the sons of God. It doesn't yet appear what we're going to be. Don't know yet, just, but we know this. We're going to be like him, for we will see him as he is. And the Bible says concerning that new body, that God gives it a body that pleases him. If it pleases God, I know it's going to please me. And if it's like Jesus, man, I could ask for nothing more. I'll be like him, for I will see him as he is. Now, the interesting thing is that in the beginning, when God first made man, God made man after his likeness and in his image. And God said, let us make man in our own image, after our own likeness. So God created man in the image of God, in the likeness of God. What all that means, I don't know. Except that I'm sure that it's referring more to the spiritual aspects than physical. God's chief emotional characteristic is love. So God created me with a capacity of love. And if you want something to just think about sometime, think about what in the world is love? How would you define love? It's easier to you can describe it maybe easier than define it. It's a feeling, yeah. An intense feeling, yeah. But do you have intense feelings for hot fudge sundaes? Oh, I love hot fudge sundaes. Oh, that's wonderful. It's wonderful. I love good music. I love a beautiful sunset. I love Mexican food. And I love my wife. But what I feel towards my wife is not what I feel towards Mexican food. Though I have to describe my feelings with the same word. So we see that the English language could be improved. The word love is overused because we don't have enough other descriptive kind of words to really describe the refinement of feelings that we have. God is love. He gave me the capacity to love. God is self-determined. He gave me the capacity of self-determination. That is, I can do what I want. You've never said that before, have you? I can do what I please. That's true, though, you can. You are a self-determined being. God created you like himself. Now, man has fallen, though. from that image of God. As you look around at the world, you don't see the world that God created. You see a world that's been polluted by man. As you look at man, you don't see the man that God created. You see man that's been polluted by sin. So it's hard to understand the original creation as we look around today because we don't see it as God created it. And thus it's hard to understand the real purpose for creation because of the fallen world and the fallen man in the world. What did God originally intend? How did God intend man to live? What were the real purposes of God? Hard to see when we look around today. You have to look to the Bible to find out what the real original intent and the real intent of God is for man. You just can't see it by looking around. You can't see man as God intended him to be. Now, the whole purpose of Jesus Christ coming, and we're at Christmas time, appropriate that we talk about it. The whole purpose of the coming of Jesus Christ was to seek and to save that which was lost. As far as man was concerned, he had lost the likeness to God through sin. Christ came to restore you into the likeness of God. Christ came to undo what sin had done in its polluting effect upon man, in its destructive effect upon man. Christ came to counteract the effects and the results of sin, and in reality, to bring you back into the original divine intent. That is, to bring you back into the image of God. And so Paul, writing to the Corinthians, said, "We with open face, as we behold the glory of the Lord, we are being changed from glory to glory into the same image by His Spirit working in us." That's God's purpose. To take your life, to fill you with His Spirit, and by the power of His indwelling Spirit, to change you and to transform you back into the image of God so that you can actually attain that which was lost by sin so many years ago. Restored to the image of God. Paul, in writing to the church at Ephesus in chapter 4, as he explains the purpose of the church, said that God has appointed in the church the apostles and the evangelists and the prophets and the pastor teachers for the perfecting of the saints, for the work of the ministry, to build up the body of Christ until we all come into the unity of the faith, the knowledge of the Son of God, into the complete or perfect man, fully matured, unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. See, that's the whole purpose of God's working in my life and in your life. He's seeking to restore us back into the image of God, which is spiritual. You see, the main characteristic of sin is self, flesh. And so in a life that is dominated by the flesh, by the ego, by the selfish desires, by the desires of the flesh, and a life that's dominated by that is not a life that's in the image of God. God is spiritual. God is a spirit, Jesus said. They that worship Him must worship Him in His spirit and truth. So in order to be like God, you've got to come over to the spiritual side of your nature. You've got to live in the Spirit. You've got to walk in the Spirit. And you've got to be ruled by the Spirit. And if your life is ruled by your flesh, you're not in the image of God. You're at odds with God. It's only as your life comes under the control of the Spirit and the spiritual aspects of your life are the dominant aspects, rather than your flesh being dominant, the Spirit is dominant. And as the Spirit is dominant, then you are being molded and conformed into the image of God. And now the purposes of God can be accomplished. The original divine intent can be fulfilled. Because the earth has gone so far, is so corrupt, because the body of man has become so corrupted, God doesn't redeem your body. God redeems your spirit, and He's going to give it a new body. This old body will go back to the dust. He's going to give you a new body. We know that when this body is gone back to dust, we have a building of God not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. So God doesn't plan to redeem your body. And if you're in love with your body, tough. You're going to leave it. And if you have a hard time with that now, wait a few years. I think it's so sad to see these women who, their whole life was beautiful, being beautiful. When I was growing up, it was Dorothy L'Amour and Lana Turner and Virginia Mayo and all these beautiful gals. And you look at them today, and there was a time probably when they thought, oh, leave this body? Never, I never want to leave this body. I'd like to live in this body forever. I'm sure that they don't have that feeling anymore. So if you have a hard time with the idea of leaving this body, just wait. You'll be glad to one day. You'll be glad to trade in for a new model. That's what I'm waiting for. Deluxe features. God's going to have to renovate the earth because of its corruption by man. And so the earth is going to go through a real renovation process during this 7-year period of time. And that's basically where we are in the New Testament. We're in the 8th chapter. We've been caught up into heaven. In chapter 4, we're still there, watching the heavenly scene, watching the 7 seals as they were opened, the corresponding judgments that happen upon the earth. When the 7th seal is opened, we see that out of that, there are these 7 angels that stand in the presence of God. They are given 7 trumpets, and they prepare to sound the trumpets. And when the first angel sounded his trumpet, chapter 8 and verse 7, there followed hail and fire mingled with blood. They were cast upon the earth, and a third part of the trees was burned up, and all of the green grass was burned up. So the first trumpet judgment has its effect upon the vegetation, the trees, the grass. Whenever we read of these various judgments, in our minds we always try to figure out from past happenings upon the earth, of natural phenomena, of what might precipitate these things. We know that back in 1906, there was, as far as they know, a meteorite that hit up in Siberia, impacted. The impact was so great that the noise of it was heard thousands of miles away. And it leveled several hundred square miles of heavy timbered forest. It just popped them over like toothpicks. Tremendously devastating. Whether or not this is related to a impacting of an asteroid or whatever, those are the things you begin to look for. As far as a natural phenomena that might explain how this could take place. During the period of the plagues upon Egypt, in one of the plagues there was hail and fire mingled with blood. It's described in the plagues of Egypt and how that the fire ran along the ground and all. The 9th chapter of Exodus there. But this is so monumental that a third part of the trees will be burnt up, the green grass. Now, there's another possible explanation, and that is just man, getting to the place of polluting the earth in a destructive way. We know that already we are polluting the natural resources. We have what we call the acid rains, as all of these chemicals and all that, the gases, they go into the clouds, they mix with the rain, and rather than rain being pure anymore, you can have acid rains that can do tremendous damage. Damage basically to crops. It's the farmers that worry more about acid rain than almost anyone. And it is having an effect upon our forest. The second angel sounded, and as it were, there was a great mountain burning with fire that was cast into the sea. Now, it could be possible that we will be passing through an asteroid belt. And we know that these asteroid belts exist in our solar system. And that in passing through an asteroid belt, some of these asteroids are 5, 10 miles in diameter. And they have theorized and have drawn up sort of scenarios of what would take place should a asteroid of 10 miles diameter would impact the earth. And from the scenarios that have been drawn up, it could be quite devastating indeed. Even to the extent of upsetting our whole balance, and the whole effect could be terrifying. This one is cast into the sea. It looks like a mountain of fire, so it does sound like a meteorite, a huge meteorite that impacts into the ocean. Ball of fire falling in the ocean. Its effect is that the ocean turns a reddish color. Now, we are familiar with red tides here. the tremendous multiplication of the plankton so that the water gets sort of a dirty looking color. They call it the red tide. I don't remember, of course I haven't, unfortunately, I love the ocean, but I just don't have time to get down and look at it much lately. But I used to love, when I lived in Huntington Beach for several years, and I hated the red tide for surfing or swimming. The water smells bad and it burns your eyes, and it's bad. But whenever the red tide would run, what we would do is go down at night and sit on the beach and watch the surf. If you've got a good red tide, when the wave breaks, because the plankton is phosphorescent, it looks like a neon tube. When the wave breaks, it just looks like a neon tube lighting up right across. It's absolutely gorgeous to behold. If you get a good red tide. I don't know that they've had a good one for several years, but we had some back in those days, and they were just fabulous. But these red tides, but the thing that a red tide will do is they take the oxygen out of the water, and it kills the fish. And so it's very devastating to the fish. And so as the water turns blood, interestingly enough, a third part of the creatures which are in the sea die. And a third part of the ships are destroyed. So probably a tremendous tidal wave by the impacting of this large asteroid or whatever it be. The ships that are at sea could ride it out, but all of the ships that are moored on the beaches with a tidal wave like that would be wiped out. And of course, you go down to Newport, you'll find there's a lot more ships moored than there are out at sea. So a third part of the ships being destroyed. The third angel sounded. There fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell on a third part of the rivers and the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood. And a third part of the waters became wormwood. And many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. Now, wormwood is a bitter little plant. And thus, it's so bitter that the star gets the name wormwood because of the bitterness. And the effect of this upon the fresh water is to turn the fresh water bitter, unpalatable. Now, again, when Moses brought the plagues upon Egypt, you remember that the rivers were turned to blood so that the water became unpotable. And here the fresh water is affected, becomes unpotable by this star that is called wormwood, bitter. I don't know if God was just giving us a hint or whatever, but Chernobyl, the nuclear accident at that Russian nuclear reactor, had a tremendous, devastating effect upon Eastern and even Western Europe. Thousands of sheep had to be slaughtered in England because of the radiation levels being too high. People could not drink milk in Western Europe for several months. They did import milk into clinics, but they gave it only to babies. And the baby could only have one bottle every third day. And mothers would leave their babies on the steps of the clinics, hoping that they'd give them more milk because the babies were crying for milk. Really, it was they didn't report to you all of the things that were going on in Europe last summer because of Chernobyl. They didn't want people to panic. The problem was Russia didn't tell their people all the things that were happening. They didn't keep up with the radiation levels and so forth as they did in Austria and in Germany and in England and all, where the people really had to curtail. Friends of ours in Austria, when they would come home, would have to take their clothes off outside, and they'd have to bathe when they came in and all. And you couldn't wear the same clothes into the house. You try to keep your house free from contamination, but your clothes would be contaminated when you go down to the store. It was really bad news. The crops were plowed under. They were destroyed because they had too much radioactivity. But the Greek word that's translated into our English Bibles, wormwood, the Greek word, that Greek word translated into Ukrainian Russian is Chernobyl, which it could be that God's just giving us a hint, showing us, well, hey, this is how it can happen. As a result of tremendous radiation. The fourth angel sounded, a third part of the sun was smitten, third part of the moon, third part of the stars. So they were darkened. The day shone only for a third part. That is, it was a third part darkened. So you didn't have bright days, just sort of dull days. And I beheld and I heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, "Woe, woe, woe to those who live on the earth, because you haven't seen anything yet, by reason of the three trumpets, the three angels which are yet to sound." So they're saying, hey, this is just the beginning. It's going to get worse when the next three angels sound their trumpets. Velikovsky has written an interesting book called Worlds in Collision, which is a theory of his that the planet Venus was introduced into the solar system in about the year 1700 BC, about the time of the Exodus out of Egypt. And he takes the plagues that happened to Egypt and he attributes them to the planet Venus, this large body, being drawn into our solar system, making a near approach to the earth, and all of its devastating side effects. And it's a fascinating book. It's a fascinating theory. The things that he postulates are things that we read here, that are happening here, the same kind of devastation and effects that he postulates from the introduction of the planet Venus into our solar system. He has written a second book called Earth's in Upheaval, in which he shows that there have been tremendous, cataclysmic, catastrophic natural phenomena that during historic period of time that has radically altered the Earth's surface. If you're into these kind of things, I personally am, you'll find both of his books intensely interesting as he does a vast amount of research to prove his points. I will suggest that if you're interested in just some fascinating reading that you get into those books and delve into some of the mysteries of the past that he seeks to unravel. But as he seeks to unravel the mysteries of the past, it is interesting how that they do parallel the descriptions of things that are yet to happen in the future here in the book of Revelation. There are days of judgment coming. Notice they proceed from heaven. The angels sound in heaven. The judgment takes place on earth. The whole purpose is to renovate the earth in order that Christ might come and establish God's kingdom and develop a new earth. We have to sort of, clean out the old before you can start over again. And that's pretty much what's happening. They're just sort of cleaning out the old system in order to get the new system established. And so we'll move along. And the first woe and the second woe as we get into chapter 9 is the fifth and sixth trumpets are sounded.